Hey, so this is the 19 to 22, 23 Chevy Silverado solution. One thing people ask us about a lot is the backup camera input solution. This particular radio has a total of 5 camera inputs. And so depending on the factory backup camera that's in your truck, the factory backup camera signal is going to come out of the main harness. If the factory backup camera is a CVBS type camera, or there's a separate plug on the same harness that will carry the AHD signal output. And this plug that you see here is going to plug into this module right over here. The production ones that are coming in the kits now have a red plug because that's what color the factory backup camera is. It's a red Fakra that's going to plug into here. Then this module converts that by plugging it into here, and so coming out of there is your factory AHD backup camera. This is going to then plug into our factory backup camera input on the main harness. And so the AHD output or the CVBS output is going to plug into this harness. This is a black plug. This is the one that has your 5 camera inputs. The shortest one out of all of them is the one you're going to use for your factory backup camera. This is the one that's labeled factory camera input. Now, once you plug it in here, you're going to want to make some changes to the dip switches on this module depending on, again, the factory backup camera setup in your truck. And so there's a label on here that shows you this information here. So this is where you would change it to make sure that you set the dip switches according to what you have. Now let's go over the settings on the radio. So on the radio, you're gonna have a settings option on the home screen. Right at the very top, you've got some options. You're looking for display. So this is where the rear camera type matters. You're gonna set that to NTSC if it's a factory CVBS output. You're gonna drop it and select 1080p if it's the AHD type input. And that's all you have to do to be able to get an image through the factory cam input on that black plug, either 1080p or NTSC. Those are your 2 factory camera signals. Now it'll also be 1080p if it's the factory 360. That one. Now the other one where it says rear camera, in here you got to make sure that you select AHD 30 frames per second. So those 2 functions are the ones that will affect how the factory backup camera works. So now that we have the factory backup camera solution explained, we're going to talk about the other 4 inputs. These other 4 inputs are not compatible with non-HD type cameras. So you cannot plug in just any aftermarket camera. Now, if the camera that you're plugging in says, oh, it's AHD and it's not viewable, then there's 2 things that might be happening. Here, under AVM video format, for those 4 inputs, the only options are 720 or 1080. If you can't see the camera in any one of these settings, then the camera you're plugging in is not a true AHD type camera. You cannot plug in a standard CVBS camera into any one of these other inputs. The fronts, the sides, they have to be a true AHD type camera with minimum 720p resolution. So this is an aftermarket camera, and this one happens to be a true 720p AHD resolution. It also has the CVBS function. So if your factory radio or any aftermarket radio doesn't have the AHD input functionality, you could do CVBS, which is 480p. So it's plugged in here. This camera has this loop that you can cut to go from AHD to CVBS. So when it's looped together, you're getting your CVBS signal. If it's open, you're gonna be getting the AHD type signal. So this is simply plugged into our power source, and this is plugged into the factory backup camera input of the GM radio. So in here, you're gonna have camera function. This one here, bottom right, is the factory backup camera. So that right there is the CVBS input resolution. If you come to the home screen, go into settings, under display, so right up here you have some options. Under display, here, rear camera type, NTSC. All I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut that loop, and I'm gonna go from CVBS to AHD. Now this camera, once you undo the loop, you have to power it down and power it back up for it to re-register the new resolution. Otherwise, you'll still be able to see it. So I'm gonna disconnect it. And then just plug it back in. So just disconnect it and plug it back in. And so that's what happens to our image. If we go back and change it to 720, this is what happens to our image. So now that's the 720p resolution. So ultimately what we're trying to say here is the factory backup camera input on this harness is the only one that can handle CVBS and AHD. These other four inputs will only work with AHD type cameras. So now, same camera set to work in AHD. We're gonna take it out of the rear and we're gonna plug it into the front input. So now this is plugged into the front input. Let me exit this and let me go back in. So that's our front camera input. All you have to do is go back into settings, and you need to switch the AVM video format from 1080 to minimum 720. The radio is gonna ask you to restart it in order for that change to take effect. I'm gonna do that. You can fast forward the video or you can watch the rest of it, but I'm not gonna cut it, just so you could see that once the radio reboots and it comes back, the camera input will now be functional. Notice how the only options on that input were 720 or 1080. NTSC, which is the CVBS output, is not an option. So now all we have to do is go to camera, and there is our front camera input. Now I'm gonna leave it there. All I'm gonna do is rejoin these two wires so that it can convert itself into a CVBS type camera. One second. All right, so there's our wires, and then I'm gonna power the camera down and power it back up. Okay, so just powered it back up, and there is our video signal. CVBS is not an option on any of the other inputs. So ultimately, under display, AVM video format controls the other 5 inputs, rear camera type, and rear camera video frame rate controls the rear camera inputs.